Hey, it's Les from the TV Dudes. This week, as part of our special coverage of Austin Film Festival's 26th year, I chat with Taylor Allen and Andrew Logan about their creative collaboration, writing the film Chappaquiddick, and much more. It's a great interview, and I hope you enjoy.
Les for the TV Dudes, and I'm here with Taylor Allen and Andrew Logan. If I could, we'll all try to remember to say names before speaking with just two people. It's usually not that crazy. I've had 5 people on a round table before. It gets nuts if anybody sounds similar. I wanted to talk to you both about attending UT and coming back to Austin in the first place. It's the town changes day to day. We just keep gaining people and not building roads. It just gets nuttier and nuttier. But separately, I love creative collaboration. I find so often writers write in a vacuum. You don't have a sounding board, and if you don't have that impetus to get over that hump yourself and make yourself put your butt in the chair, then it just never happens. And the creative collaboration can sometimes ease that barrier of entry maybe on starting a project, because you can sounding board off your friend. Is that how y'all's collaboration together works, or how did your working relationship form?
Okay, so I think we can answer this question in a way that also ties in what you started with about UT, which is something that non-Austin interviewers rarely ask me about my UT, University of Texas Longhorns roots, and so this is an exciting opportunity to weave in some of our working style with that part of the question, which is all integral, because the way that Andrew and I met, this is Taylor Allen speaking, is in film school at a film 301 class or something like that, where it was you actually shot on film, but you also edited on film with tape and splice and all that. Yeah. And so the reason that that's an important detail is it's not something that even in 2004 anyone other than the most hardcore film geek would want to be in a room with spools of film.
They had plenty of digital video classes for the tape.
Danny Boyle and Steven Soderbergh were already making Bubble and 28 Days Later at that point, so nobody was film is the future.
Grindhouse had already come out, split down the middle, digital and film.
Yeah, exactly. And so
keep making hand gestures like it matters.
No, I am a big hand gesture guy too, so if anybody hears me knock the recorder, you know what happened. But the point is that Andrew and I, from a very early going, were guys that liked some old school style with some real commitment and grit to the process. And so it wasn't surprising to me that in a class of 18, it winnows down to there really were 4 of us that became thick as thieves. Basically all moved out to LA within 6 months of each other. And then within 6 months of that, at least 3 of us were living in the same Beverly Hills apartment. And so it was really a UT collaboration amongst a big kind of group of those hardcore people. And if you asked any of those guys that I'm talking about, Andrew very much included, in those first 6 years while we were all in LA, I had a lot of very negative things to say about my college education experience. And the reason why I bring that up publicly on something that a podcast will broadcast to people who work at UT now, I say it because much like everything in life, it's a lot like dating. And sometimes you've got a girlfriend that you love even, but things aren't working great, and you do break up, and it's years later that you're you know what? She was pretty great. I was the one who screwed that up. That was on me. And so it's really in 2011, 2012 that Andrew is the first to want to show me the light, but he does it for his own reasons. And I'll let you tell that part of the story, that why did Austin come back into our lives in a big way?
So I had a high school girlfriend that I had that I had met when I was a senior in high school. Her mom was my high school counselor. Her dad was like the local like postman, and she was the love of my life. She moved to LA to be with me, and then she hated LA, and so.
You can take the girl out of Texas, but you can't take the Texas out of the girl, and she wanted to be back in Texas.
She wanted to be back in Texas, and I had been out in Los Angeles for about 6 years, and Taylor and I were roommates, and so, and at that time, we actually, while roommates, we each had our own separate writing partners at the time. And I moved back to Austin to be with the girl who I ended up marrying, and we have a kid together. And
I was about to say, tell me that you didn't. I mean, I've had friends that are in Austin now because they moved here with a girl, and that girl is back in Baltimore.
No, it's very much a happily ever after situation. Wonderful. So I have no complaints. And when I moved back, I actually thought it was like the worst career decision I think I could have ever made, because I was in LA at the center of the Hollywood universe.
Give them the detail of what you were doing right as you left.
I was doing lots of things.
You were assisting some writers.
Yes, I was assisting writers.
Making way up the traditional path.
Yeah. The writer's strike had just happened, and the recovery from that kind of hadn't fully happened for me yet. And so anyway, I thought it was a bad career decision, because what I wanted to do was work on my own scripts and rise up the ranks in development in Hollywood. But that wasn't happening. So when I moved back to Austin, I actually started over from scratch and just was like, all right, well, I'll just PA on commercials and low budget movies and see if I can work my way up. And then within
the mean ADs are telling him hey, you're sitting down too much. We need you to constantly keep the perimeter on your feet,
Despite that, though, I rose to the ranks. And within 2 years, I had helped produce a movie that premiered at Sundance with Aaron Paul and Juliette Lewis, a movie called Helene, directed by Kat Candler. And so it ended up, while moving here, I thought was a bad career decision, to being kind of the best thing that could ever happen to me, because our partnership was sort of born out of that.
But I also think that one of the reasons why I wanted to become writing partners with Andrew was because he's my best friend. I was the best man in his wedding. I wanted to spend more time hanging out with him and talking to him, but how do you do that and make it actually make sense without that impetus of a project or something that you're working on together? But, I'm not going to lie to you. I also saw Andrew putting himself out there in the Austin film community in a way where it was there's a strategic partnership even beyond the friendship, that it's when he left, he was a boy, and now he's a man in Austin, and he is a producer of multiple Sundance award-winning movies, and it's maybe I should hitch my star to that ride,
I could almost see the argument being the other way of Andrew feeling well, now I've got a writing partner connection to the person that remained in LA.
It's totally true. I mean, it works completely 100% both ways. Taylor, for what it's worth, is I was just complimenting him earlier today that while I don't know if he's a creative genius, I think that he has the potential to be one. And I think that he's very smart, and it goes back to that film school class that we were in. the story I like to tell was the two other people that he was talking about with the four of us. They were in a group together because we all got just like randomly selected into groups, and their films that they were making were way better than anybody else was making. And I was in a group that I didn't think was very good, and so midway through the semester, I jumped ship on my group, and during a break, I asked Taylor and one of the other guys, hey, do you care if I join your group? And that's actually how I met Taylor, was because it was I saw in him somebody who could make me better as a filmmaker.
I have to interject. Les is doing a great job trying to redirect the conversation to new topics, but I could explore the same one for hours. So Andrew and I at Austin Film Festival got to do a panel about writing partnerships, and I think what Andrew just finished saying is really a lot about strengths and weaknesses, and that's really what makes a partnership great. Mm-hmm. And so you brought up but one of you is in LA, and so there's some strategy there too. you would think. But here's how incompetent I am at networking and taking advantage of my proximity to intelligent, creative, powerful people. And that's why I stuck my star to Andrew, is because he actually is smart about those things. So our script, Chappaquiddick, gets bought, and it's kind of going into production, and directors are getting attached. And at that same time, we get our first writing assignment. And right as we're about to start going on being paid in advance for the first time, I get called in by my boss at The Simpsons to edit The Edge of 17. And so I am editing this movie, The Edge of 17, and because I'm taking enough calls about Chappaquiddick stuff, the producer, James L. Brooks, and I don't like to drop names, but it's important in this case to show how stupid I am. So James L. Brooks is like, so I heard you got a script. I'm like, yeah, we'll see how it goes. He's like, what's it about? I'm like, I got to finish the scene, Jim, 1 second, And eventually he's like, Taylor, that script sounds really interesting. I would like to read it. And I'm like, okay, cool. And I completely forget about it. I do not do anything about this whatsoever. And I think maybe a couple days goes by, and Jim's assistant emails me, and she's like, hey, Jim is still asking about that script. Are you going to send it? And I'm like, oh yeah, I was supposed to do that. I still didn't do it for a couple more days because I was super busy with other stuff. And when I tell this story to other writers in LA, they're just like, you moron. You have the keys to the kingdom right in front of you, and you're not even walking through the gate,
I'm amazed, though. I've heard a variant of that story before where people, from the other, where the James L. Brooks person is saying, people think no one ever wants to read my stuff or whatever, but somebody's but I offer to read people's stuff, and you'd be amazed how often no one sends it. And it struck home for me for that exact same reason of yep, okay, keep my head on a swivel. If someone asks to read my stuff, drop everything I'm doing to send it to them, because that's the gold star. That's the key. But yeah, people talk all the time about I made this offer knowing that it's the world. I want to read your script, buddy. And for whatever reason, whether you're too busy with the real job and Chappaquiddick's not real, or whatever reason, but you don't send it.
I think the big part of it for me is that I am always worried, having been raised by a wonderful conservative mother from Oklahoma and Texas, that those Southern values is that if she were in the same situation, sitting behind some guy and finding out about their lives, she would say, oh, I'd like to read that, even if she did not and did not want to do it.
It's a lovely script.
Exactly. And so, I just assumed that he didn't really want to read it, but he wanted me to feel better about myself. And it was only after other people explained to me, it's no. When someone who's that successful says it, they know that they can't take it back. It's not a Brooke Allen situation.
It took my wife telling me several times that, so-and-so has a real job and does not have time to make you feel better at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. If they said they liked it, believe them.
Yeah,
and
totally.
It's so hard to internalize.
Totally.
Talking about Chappaquiddick, I've been talking all weekend with people who make movies, make shows, make whatever. And there's always that moment where somebody comes to you and says, "This is the coolest idea. There's some grain here that my brain can't let go of." And then it comes time to try to break it as a movie or try to break it as a script, and it's not completely there. The story is interesting but not thrilling, maybe, or something. The Chappaquiddick Scandal is something that everybody knows a hair about, a little bit about, right? I know it involves the bridge. I know it involved Teddy Kennedy. What was the grain of sand that wouldn't stop irritating, that became the pearl for y'all of why you had to do this story?
So I want to quote-unquote reject one aspect of the premise of your question.
Okay.
And it was something that you said mostly in passing, so it's mostly an opportunity to tell another self-deprecating story.
Writers are always good for these.
We did a lot of press for Chappaquiddick once it came out in theaters. And one recurring question that a lot of interviewers like to ask us, the writers who came up with the idea of doing it, they were like, what made you think this was a good idea? I mean, like, when you think about, like, box office success, the last thing that you think about is, like, 1960 Scandal, nobody remembers. And we're like, we literally thought it was the best idea ever. We thought it was so cool. We were so interested. Everything about it said $100 million blockbuster. And they're like, yeah, no, that is not happening. It was like, okay, good to know.
You're not going to get any foreign sales.
Yeah. Things we learned after the fact. But no, I mean, like, honestly, it is just so easy to point to the legacy that the Kennedy family has across America, but in particular for two boys from Dallas. Unfortunately, the Kennedy legacy looms a little bit larger there than other places.
Yeah.
And so I think that I always looked at the Kennedy family as like Camelot, and when I first discovered the concept that something as terrible as Chappaquiddick happened, it was a moment where I really did go back to my mom, and she loves to tell this story. So I'm like, how did you not tell me about this, Mom? And it's like, I think that like losing innocence is something that means a lot to me. And I think the only reason that Ted Kennedy ended up not finding himself on the other side of a judge's hammer is because we all as Americans felt this great deep sympathy for the tragedies that the Kennedys had been through, and this is his moment of loss of innocence. And even though he's a 37, 38-year-old man at that point, he wasn't being looked at as somebody who was really responsible for his actions. And at the end of the day, we wrote the script in 2014, long before Donald Trump was a candidate for president. We wrote the script 3 years before Ronan Farrow wrote an article about Harvey Weinstein. But the idea that powerful men needed to be held accountable was a grain of sand that we were never going to let go of. So.
For me, all of that is 100% true. But the thing when I knew that like we really had something special was in our research process when we discovered that the moon landing was happening at the same time as this scandal was unfolding. And to us, it was just like, how rich could this be in terms of the promise of John F. Kennedy's vision for America and the greatest accomplishment that humankind is achieving, that Kennedy, basically made happen at the same time, the lowest point in the Kennedy legacy.
Here's another part of the Kennedy family showing me the lowest part of human nature. That
was just like, I remember being calling you on the phone and just being so excited. I was like,
well, then I also have to add...
The juxtaposition of those two things is, like, I can definitely see how, if we can lay these next to each other, people will feel that tension and be like, what the...
We certainly thought so, and the way that we analyzed our success or failure as we were writing and as we were making the movie and editing the movie was always, if this doesn't work, it's on us. Like, the material is here. The problem isn't, we don't have the right pieces. It's like, no, the pieces are all there, buddy.
And our lesson that we've, in terms of, how we talk about things is, the most important thing, or the most important job for a writer to succeed is choose the right story.
Yeah, for sure.
Editing is something that I feel like often gets overlooked in terms of its importance on how the story comes across to the audience, to the end user.
Yeah.
To the point that I think Robert Rodriguez has done interviews about not ever wanting to hire an editor on his movies because he feels like it's abdicating part of the process he really needs to be in.
We have thoughts.
And so I'm always amazed at how overlooked that position is, and how, if you wanted to cold ruin an episode of The Simpsons, you could fuck every joke up on that show.
For sure.
By timing it wrong, right?
Yeah, that's the reason they pay me the big bucks.
Can you talk about getting into editing, and has that influenced you as a writer? Do you try to structure scenes a little differently so maybe they won't fuck up when they're out of your hands?
Yes, I will answer all those questions and more.
I'm sorry, I tend to ask five things in a row.
And we can do a meta thing later where you tell me if I'm a bad interview subject, because I will always say what I'm most interested in first, but I will then try to get through the other parts of the question too.
What you were most interested in is usually more interesting than what I thought we were going to talk about. So go.
So the way that I learned about storytelling and the craftsmanship that goes into filmmaking was not until my very final class in film school, which fortunately also was with Andrew and was with those two other guys who shall remain nameless.
Scorsese and Coppola.
Yeah, it was one of their sons, you know. It was the Eric Trump of Scorsese children. He's the better Trump, right? We think Don Jr. Yeah, he's doing. So
there are no better Trumps.
Is Tiffany the best Trump?
They're all below him. No, Barron is the one that we accept.
But Barron is fine.
We have to accept him.
He's got a name like a cursed prince. What the fuck?
I think he's going to change it. I think that's not sticking around forever. Yeah. And I mean both parts of it. He's going to be like
all of it.
Barry Jenkins, but like not that Barry Jenkins.
Leroy. I'll change it to Leroy Jenkins.
Yeah. No, it's great.
No legacy there.
Yeah. I know that joke. I showed that to Andrew many years ago. So either way, filmmaking, the way that I learned about it and how it works through the craftsmanship of each stage of storytelling is in the final class that we took at UT. And it was taught by a brand new professor. It was his first time teaching the class that he was teaching. It was advanced narrative filmmaking. Really, it was like your thesis short was kind of the vibe of it. And the teacher was a filmmaker who is writing and directing partners with his twin brother, but it was just the one twin, Alex Smith. And believe it or not, he made a movie immediately before teaching this class called The Slaughter Rule, which I do recommend that anybody listening to this podcast like check out and like understand like what level of filmmaking talent UT was able to bring in to teach like these two jokers that you're listening to on a podcast. And so The Slaughter Rule was a movie that he made starring David Morse, who's a great actor that everybody should know. Extreme Measures is a great movie. People should watch that too.
And Morse is great in everything, and nobody knows him.
Exactly. But the other two actors, I don't need to give their credits, but it was an early performance from a young Amy Adams and a young Ryan Gosling. And just to shout out like a story that I love about my old professor Alex Smith, he was talking about Ryan Gosling's acting process, and Ryan Gosling likes to highlight the script in like probably like, you know, a 10-pack of highlighters of colors, and he's using that as a guide for emotion.
Okay.
And he came up to Alex, you know, sometime during the process of making The Slaughter Rule, and he's like, I didn't have enough colors on this one. And I was like, oh my god, like this is acting, this is filmmaking, this is how it all works. And so now that I've like done enough shouting out of my favorite film school teacher, I'll say the thing that he gave me that was very valuable was the idea that a film is written 3 times. It's written once on the paper, and then once on set, and then once in the editing room. And his rule, and it was like distinct to him in this class, was in the class for making your movie, you're allowed to do 2 out of those 3 writing steps. So you could write and direct. You could direct and edit. Or you could write and edit. Or if there's another one that I'm not thinking of, you could do that.
Collaborate on one of these.
You have to let somebody else in on one of those 3 steps. And I fully 100% believe that for the average non-Soderbergh man or woman amongst us, like, that's a great rule of thumb to operate by. And so for that reason, like, yeah, a lot of people asked me, because I had enough editing credits behind me when, like, we were making Chappaquiddick. They're like, so are you going to edit it? And I was like, man, I don't want to edit it. And it's not because I don't like pushing buttons and telling stories. It's that I want to bring in a third perspective to shore up all these various perspectives and ideas that need to coalesce into this thing. And we ended up getting to hire another film school buddy of mine who'd been working for Terrence Malick as an editor for the last 10 years or something.
Not a bad resume.
Definitely not. That's how he got hired. Because, you know, even though I recommended him, ultimately the director pulled the trigger. I think that the montage at the end of Chappaquiddick with the man on the street interviews, if you realize that it's edited by a Malick editor, you realize like the documentarian specificness of the choices of all these cuts. It was really, really great. And I would like never want to like lose that going forward. So like I do have ambitions to direct, but I don't ever have ambitions to do all 3.
Yeah.
And that's my like counterpoint to Robert Rodriguez.
Yeah, I feel like learning to work that muscle or getting used to that collaborative muscle is something that not a lot of writers get any practice at. but I had it said to me once that if you want to write something just by yourself and finish it, write a novel. That a screenplay is an invitation to collaborate.
Yeah.
And that once you're done with it, what you have is a document with which to bring collaborators on board.
Yeah.
And that if you can't accept other voices, then you should not make it a screenplay. Because nobody wants to read their movie. Like, you can't go to an AMC theater and throw out the screenplay and everybody be cool.
Yeah.
There's going to be more work involved. Do you think y'all's collaborative work together already helped you accept that?
Neither of us would be sitting here talking to you without the other one. Like, I think that one of my biggest problems as a writer is Aaron Sorkin's first rule of screenwriting. Does it make sense? Like, I can write you some beautiful words that don't make very much sense at all. They make sense to me. I'm no dummy. I feel it. But Andrew, from early going, it was very clear that he could wrap his head around what it was I was trying to say and then translate that into something that other people could understand. And so that's very, very helpful just like on a day-to-day basis. And
but even beyond that, like my background as a producer, which is nothing but collaboration. I mean, that's the job.
Yeah, finding people to help do this next thing that you need done.
And so obviously that helped with my collaboration with Taylor, but then it helped whenever we, get a producer attached and a director attached, and then we're in production and or post-production, like that. Those skills that I've learned through the years doing that is like, I think made us collectively better at the table with all the people who have more experience at this than us.
But I'll also say, strengths and weaknesses again. I think that, like, Andrew has an ability to, like, look at those next steps and, like, know where a thing needs to go that a lot of times I don't. And so I think that, like, the best that I could ever hope for, by myself is some beautifully written words in a drawer that go nowhere. And, like, Andrew is the person that, like, can take the risk of being like, hey, will you read my thing? If James L. Brooks asks Andrew to send him something, it's in the inbox in the next 30 minutes. Like, so. Yeah.
Also, too, I think that, like, the script itself, like, whenever we sent it out, was in a place of a certain threshold because of our respective backgrounds as a producer and editor. I think one of the things,
something unfilmable.
I think that, like, when people read it for the first time, they were like, we could make this. Like, this is very makeable.
Yeah.
And I think that has to do with the fact that, like, we're thinking about editing and producerially in terms of how does this thing look on the page and how, because we both know, like, what it needs to happen.
Yeah. I think a lot of times that gets overlooked. It's so difficult to get over the hump of just finishing your damn thing and getting your, and then sending it to the person that wants to read it or whatever. That you don't think about, that third act set piece is impossible unless we have X $million, and there's no way to rewrite it without gutting the movie or something like that. So that when a producer reads it, they go, this isn't serious. This is good, but I can't make it.
And we're good at coming up with, like, creative solutions to those types of problems. Like, as an example, like when we were on set, they were having, every movie has budget issues, and we were trying to find ways to cut the budget. And we had one scene where they were just talking about, like, the kitchen. It was taking place in the kitchen, and period kitchens are very expensive because you have to buy all the period appliances and that sort of thing. And we were just like, let's just set it in the living room. Like, let's just move it over into the next room. Like.
Yeah, we found out that you could save like $50,000 by having it in a bedroom versus a kitchen.
How attached are you to the kitchen? Yeah.
Not much. Yeah.
But on the converse, like we did fight for the things that we did think were very essential and very valuable to the integrity of the script.
There's got to be a bridge.
Like, for example, like in Chappaquiddick, there's a scene where he's in a regatta, and it's expensive to shoot these boats and get these boats and do that, and that was something that we pushed and pulled a lot with the producers on, and ultimately we were able to get, and I think that the movie's better for it.
I'm going to throw out, though, that, like, you also, as first-time writers and first-time executive producers on a movie of a budget over, $8 million, you don't know what you don't know. And so we have a very long sequence in the script to Chappaquiddick that got cut down a lot in the movie, where Mary Jo Kopechne, the woman that was riding in the car with Ted Kennedy, is trapped inside the car for an extended period of time, waiting for somebody to help her out. And we gave the character a lot of business and a lot of autonomy in terms of trying to get out of the car, because that's been a constant question about, like, why didn't she get out the same way as Ted? And ultimately what we didn't realize we needed to, like, specify in the script is you're going to need a car that you can split in half or even quarters so that you can, like, get the camera through and a safe thing for the actress. And so then, we show up on set and it's like, oh yeah, we only have the one car and it's got to come out, like, other than being wet, pristine. And it's like, oh crap. Less of that's in the movie.
Yeah. And like you said, lesson learned. I mean, how would you have learned that before?
Yeah, I think, going forward, that's one of the reasons why it's really exciting to work with Andrew, who's a credible producer, and me, who is a credited producer. And I think that between the two of us, we can, like, think in advance enough to try to avoid that in the future.
Thank you both so much for talking to me about this today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. Thanks for having us.
Thanks a lot.
The TV Dudes is an independently run podcast and a member of the Electric Sweater Podcast Network. We are exclusively listener supported. If you'd like to help us out, go to patreon.com/tvdudes. You can like us on Facebook and Twitter @TVDudes. All the music for our show is by our friend and original TV dude, Gregory J. Amani Smith. To find out more about us, go to thetvdudes.com and electricsweater.com. I'm Grant Davis. Thanks for listening.